The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Rosa rolled over and hit the snooze button, her body aching from yesterday's 14-hour shift. She stared at the ceiling of her tiny bedroom, counting the water stains that had grown bigger since last month's heavy rain. The landlord still hadn't fixed the roof, and Rosa knew better than to ask again. "Mia, are you awake?" came a weak voice from the next room. Rosa quickly sat up and walked to her mother's bedside. Elena was already trying to get out of bed, her hands shaking as she reached for the small plastic container filled with pills. "I'm here. Mama, let me help you." Rosa counted out the morning medications: 3 white pills for blood pressure, 2 blue ones for diabetes, and 1 yellow capsule that cost more than Rosa made in 2 days. She watched her mother swallow each pill with difficulty, knowing that these tiny tablets were the only things keeping Elena alive. "You don't have to work so much, Rosa. I feel stronger today. Maybe I can look for something small, just a few hours here and there." Rosa forced a smile and shook her head. "Don't worry about that, Mama. Just focus on getting better. I've got everything under control." But Rosa didn't have anything under control. The medical bills kept piling up on the kitchen table, each envelope bringing more stress and sleepless nights. The pharmacy had already called twice this week about the outstanding balance. The rent was due in 5 days, and Rosa was still $60 short. She pulled on her uniform, a faded blue dress with Danny's Diner embroidered on the pocket. The fabric was thin from countless washes, and there was a small tear near the hem that she'd tried to mend with matching thread. Her white sneakers had holes in them, but they were comfortable enough to stand in for 12 hours straight. The walk to work took 20 minutes through streets that came alive with the early morning crowd. Construction workers grabbed coffee and donuts before heading to job sites. Office workers hurried past with their phones pressed to their ears. Rosa had learned to walk quickly and keep her head down. She couldn't afford to be late, not even by a minute. Danny's Diner sat on the corner of 5th and Main, squeezed between a laundromat and a check-cashing store. The building was old, with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered on good days and stayed dark on bad ones. The smell of bacon grease and coffee hit Rosa as soon as she pushed through the front door. "You're 2 minutes late," growled Frank Morrison from behind the register. He was a heavy man with thinning hair and permanent scowl lines around his eyes. Frank had owned the diner for 15 years and reminded everyone about it daily. "Sorry, Mr. Morrison, the bus was running behind schedule. The bus is always running behind schedule. Maybe you should catch an earlier one." Rosa nodded and tied her apron around her waist. She'd learned not to argue with Frank, especially not in the morning when he was already in a bad mood. She grabbed her order pad and pen, checked that the coffee was fresh, and started her day. The morning rush was always the same faces. There was Bill, who ordered 2 eggs over easy with wheat toast every single day. Mrs. Peterson always asked for oatmeal with extra brown sugar and complained that it was never sweet enough. The truckers ordered huge breakfasts and left small tips, counting out exact change before heading back to the highway. Rosa moved between tables with practiced efficiency, refilling coffee cups before they were empty, remembering who wanted cream and who drank it black. She smiled at every customer, asked about their families, and remembered their stories. Mrs. Peterson's grandson had just started college. Bill's daughter was getting married in the spring. These small connections made the long shifts feel less lonely. By lunchtime, Rosa's feet were already throbbing. She'd been standing for 7 hours with only one 10-minute break. The lunch crowd was different from the morning regulars, more impatient, more demanding, and often more rude. Rosa had learned to let the harsh words roll off her back. A man in an expensive suit snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. A woman complained loudly that her soup was too hot, then 5 minutes later said it was too cold. "Order up," shouted Carlos from the kitchen. He was the only other employee who'd been at the diner longer than Rosa, and he understood the struggle. Sometimes he'd slip her an extra dinner roll or a cup of soup when Frank wasn't looking. The afternoon dragged by slowly. Rosa's back ached from carrying heavy trays, and her smile felt forced by the time the dinner crowd started arriving. She calculated tips in her head as she worked, knowing she needed at least $45 to make the rent deadline. So far, she had $28.67. A family with 3 young children ordered hamburgers and milkshakes, then left without leaving any tip at all. Rosa stared at the empty table and felt tears stinging her eyes. She quickly wiped them away before anyone could see. Table 6 is still waiting for their order, Frank called out, his voice sharp with irritation. Rosa hurried to check on the elderly couple who'd been sitting patiently for 15 minutes. She brought them fresh rolls and promised their meals would be ready soon, even though she could see Carlos was overwhelmed in the kitchen. As the sun set outside the diner's dirty windows, Rosa's energy was completely drained. Her uniform was stained with coffee and ketchup. Her hair had fallen out of its ponytail and her feet felt like they might fall off. But she kept moving, kept smiling, kept doing her job. The evening shift meant different customers again. Working parents grabbed quick dinners before heading home to help with homework. Teenagers came in with loud voices and big attitudes but small wallets. Rosa served them all with the same tired smile, hoping each table might be the one to leave a generous tip. At 9 o'clock, Frank finally let her take a real break. Rosa sat in the back alley behind the diner, eating a small salad that Carlos had made for her. The cool air felt good against her face, and for just a few minutes, she allowed herself to dream about a different life. She thought about nursing school, about wearing scrubs instead of a stained waitress uniform. She imagined helping people heal instead of just bringing them food. She pictured her mother getting the best medical care, not having to choose between medications because they couldn't afford them all. But dreams didn't pay the rent or buy pills. Dreams didn't put food on the table or fix the leaking roof. Rosa finished her salad, tied her apron back on, and returned to work. The last few hours passed in a blur of dirty dishes, wiped tables, and counted tips. When the diner finally closed at 11, Rosa's total for the day was $31.42. Still not enough, but she'd figure something out. She always did. Rosa walked home through streets that were quieter now, thinking about tomorrow and the day after that. Each shift was a small battle in a war she wasn't sure she could win. But she kept fighting, kept working, kept hoping that somehow things would get better. She had no idea that tomorrow would change everything. Tuesday started like any other day at Danny's diner. The morning rush had come and gone, leaving behind empty coffee cups and crumpled napkins. Rosa wiped down tables while Carlos restocked the kitchen for the lunch crowd. The familiar sounds of sizzling bacon and clinking dishes filled the air. Around 2 in the afternoon, when the diner was mostly empty except for Mrs. Peterson reading her newspaper and a trucker studying a road map, the front door chimed. Rosa looked up from refilling the sugar dispensers and saw a small figure standing in the doorway. It was a little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame. A faded red t-shirt that was too big and jeans rolled up at the bottom because they were too long. His sneakers had holes in the toes, and his dark hair stuck up in different directions like he'd been sleeping outside. The boy stood there for a moment, looking around the diner with wide, uncertain eyes. He clutched something tightly in his small fist and took a few hesitant steps toward the counter. "Can I help you, sweetie?" Rosa asked gently, walking over to him. The boy looked up at her and Rosa's heart immediately broke. His face was thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes that no child should have. But it was the look in those eyes that really got to her, a mixture of hope and fear that she recognized too well. I have some money," the boy whispered, opening his hand to show Rosa a collection of coins and crumpled dollar bills. "Is it enough for food?" Rosa knelt down to his level and carefully counted what he had. $1, 2 quarters, 3 dimes, a nickel, and 2 pennies. $1.67 total. "What's your name, honey?" Rosa asked softly. "David," the boy replied, his voice barely audible. "Well, David, let me show you what we have." Rosa stood up and guided him to a booth by the window. "Are you hungry?" David nodded eagerly, but then looked worried. "But I don't know if I have enough money. I found it in different places and I counted it 3 times to make sure." Rosa felt a lump forming in her throat. This child was clearly on his own, probably hadn't eaten in hours, maybe even days. She could see him trying to be brave, but his stomach growled loudly enough for both of them to hear. "Let me get you a menu," Rosa said, though she already knew what she was going to do. She brought over a menu and sat across from David in the booth. He studied it carefully, his finger tracing under the words as he tried to read. Rosa noticed that his hands were dirty and his fingernails were bitten down to nothing. "Can you read some of the words for me?" David asked shyly. "I'm still learning." Rosa spent the next few minutes going through the menu with him, explaining what each item was. David listened intently, but she could see him getting more and more discouraged as he realized how little his money would buy. "The soup is $3, he said sadly, "and the sandwich is $4.50. I don't have enough for anything, do I?" Rosa's heart was breaking watching this little boy try to figure out how to buy food with pocket change. She thought about her own mother at home, and how she'd feel if Rosa was somewhere hungry and alone. "You know what, David?" Rosa said with a bright smile. "You're in luck today. We have a special deal that's exactly $1.67. David's eyes lit up. "Really? What kind of deal?" "It's the Tuesday special," Rosa said, making it up as she went along. "You get a grilled cheese sandwich, French fries, and a chocolate milk. And it's exactly the amount of money you have." "But are you sure?" David asked, hardly believing his good fortune. "Absolutely sure," Rosa said, standing up. "You just sit right here and I'll get that order started for you." Rosa walked to the kitchen, her mind racing. The grilled cheese sandwich cost $3.25, the fries were $2.50, and the chocolate milk was $1.75. The total was $7.50. Rosa reached into her apron pocket and pulled out $8 from her own tip money. "Carlos," she called softly to the cook, "I need a grilled cheese and fries and make them extra good, okay?" Carlos looked through the service window and saw the little boy sitting alone in the booth. He didn't ask any questions, just nodded and started cooking. Rosa poured a large glass of chocolate milk and brought it to David's table. His face absolutely glowed when he saw it. "This is the biggest chocolate milk I've ever seen," he said, taking a careful sip. "It's so good." "I'm glad you like it," Rosa said, sitting down across from him again. "Are you from around here, David?" The boy's expression changed, becoming guarded. I'm staying with friends," he said quietly. Rosa could tell he was lying, but she didn't push. She'd seen enough kids in tough situations to know when not to ask too many questions. Instead, she just smiled and let him enjoy his chocolate milk. A few minutes later, Carlos rang the bell, and Rosa brought out a plate piled high with perfectly golden French fries and a grilled cheese sandwich cut into triangles. She'd asked Carlos to add extra cheese, and he'd thrown in some pickle slices on the side. David's reaction was like watching someone see magic. His eyes got huge, and he looked from the plate to Rosa and back again. "This is all for me," he whispered. "Every bit of it," Rosa confirmed. David picked up one triangle of the sandwich with both hands and took a big bite. He chewed slowly, savoring every taste, and Rosa could see tears forming in his eyes. "Are you okay, sweetie?" she asked gently. David nodded quickly and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "It's just really, really good," he said. "I haven't had grilled cheese in a really long time." Rosa sat with David while he ate, watching him carefully save half of everything. When she asked why, he explained that he wanted to make it last longer. She convinced him to eat it all now while it was warm, promising that food always tasted better hot. About halfway through the meal, David looked up at Rosa with serious eyes. "Why are you being so nice to me?" he asked. Rosa thought about it for a moment. "Because everyone deserves kindness," she said simply. "And because when I was little, someone was kind to me when I needed it most." David smiled, the first real smile Rosa had seen from him. It transformed his whole face, making him look like the child he should be instead of someone carrying the weight of the world. As David finished his meal, Rosa noticed Frank Morrison emerging from his office. He'd been doing paperwork all afternoon, but now he was walking around the dining room with his usual scowl. Rosa felt a chill of worry but pushed it aside. David needed to finish eating in peace. "Thank you so much for the Tuesday special," David said when he was done, carefully placing his $1.67 on the table. "It was the best meal ever." "You're very welcome, David," Rosa said, her heart full despite her worries about Frank. The little boy slid out of the booth and headed toward the door, turning back to wave goodbye. Rosa waved back, watching him disappear down the street with a full belly and what she hoped was a little bit of happiness. She began clearing the table, David's coins still sitting where he'd left them. Rosa picked them up and put them in her pocket, knowing she'd given this child something much more valuable than a meal. She'd given him hope, but as she turned around, she found Frank Morrison standing right behind her, his face darker than she'd ever seen it. Frank Morrison stood behind Rosa with his arms crossed, his face red with anger. She could feel his presence before she even turned around, like a dark cloud blocking out the sun. When she finally faced him, his small eyes were blazing with fury. "What exactly did I just witness?" Frank's voice was low and dangerous, the kind of tone that made everyone in the diner stop what they were doing. Rosa's heart started pounding. She clutched David's coins in her pocket, trying to stay calm. "I served a customer, Mr. Morrison. A little boy who was hungry. A little boy who paid $1.67 for a $7 meal," Frank shot back. "Did you think I was blind? Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Mrs. Peterson looked up from her newspaper, sensing trouble. The trucker at the counter stopped stirring his coffee and turned to watch. Even Carlos poked his head out from the kitchen, concern written all over his face. "Mr. Morrison, I can explain," Rosa said quietly, hoping to keep this conversation private. "Oh, you'll explain all right," Frank said, his voice getting louder. "You'll explain how you think you can give away my food to every vagrant that walks through that door." "He wasn't a vagrant," Rosa said, her own voice getting stronger. "He was a hungry child, a little boy who probably hasn't eaten in days." Frank let out a harsh laugh. "A hungry child? Rosa, this is a business, not a charity. Every piece of food that goes out that door needs to be paid for. Do you understand that? Do you understand how thin our profit margins are?" Rosa knew the margins were thin. She also knew that Frank drove a brand new pickup truck and lived in a house 3 times the size of her apartment, but she kept those thoughts to herself. "I paid for the meal myself," Rosa said, pulling the $8 from her apron pocket. "I used my own tip money to cover the difference. The diner didn't lose a single penny." Frank's expression didn't soften. If anything, he looked angrier. "That's not the point, and you know it. The point is that you made that decision without asking me. You set a precedent that we're some kind of soup kitchen." "Mr. Morrison, please," Rosa tried again. "He was just a little boy who was hungry. I couldn't let him walk away with nothing." "Yes, you could have," Frank snapped. "That's exactly what you should have done. This is the real world, Rosa. People need to pay for what they get. Period." Mrs. Peterson stood up from her booth and walked to the counter to pay her bill. She avoided eye contact with everyone, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. The trucker did the same, leaving a $1 tip and hurrying out the door. "Look around," Frank said, gesturing to the nearly empty diner. "See how your little charity case cleared out my paying customers? Nobody wants to eat in a place that attracts beggars and street kids." Rosa felt anger rising in her chest. He wasn't a beggar. He had money. He was trying to buy food with everything he had. "Pocket change," Frank shouted. "Pocket change isn't enough to run a business. And now every homeless person and runaway kid in the city is going to hear about the bleeding heart waitress at Danny's diner who gives away free meals." "That's not going to happen," Rosa said firmly. "You're damn right it's not going to happen," Frank replied, "because you don't work here anymore." The words hit Rosa like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face and her knees went weak. "What did you say?" "You heard me. You're fired. Clean out your locker and get out of my restaurant." Rosa stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Morrison, please. I need this job. My mother is sick and I'm the only one working. I promise this won't happen again." "You're right, it won't happen again, because you won't be here to do it." Carlos came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "Frank, come on, man. Rosa's been working here for 3 years. She's never caused any problems before." "Stay out of this, Carlos," Frank warned. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us," Carlos said bravely. "Rosa is good people. She works harder than anyone else here." Frank turned his glare on Carlos. "Do you want to join her?" "Because I can find a new cook just as easily as I can find a new waitress." Carlos looked at Rosa with sadness in his eyes, but he stepped back. Rosa understood. Carlos had a family to feed too. He couldn't risk his job no matter how much he wanted to help her. "Please, Mr. Morrison." Rosa tried one more time, her voice breaking. "I'll work extra shifts. I'll pay you back double what the meal cost. Just please don't fire me." Frank shook his head. "This isn't about the money, Rosa. This is about respect. This is about following rules. This is about understanding that I'm the boss and you're the employee." Rosa felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't give Fra and Kay the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "I did what I thought was right," she said quietly. "Well, your idea of right just cost you your job," Frank replied coldly. "Now get your things and get out. And don't expect a good reference from me." Rosa walked slowly to the small employee break room behind the kitchen. Her locker was barely big enough for her purse and a change of clothes. She pulled out her sweater and the small lunch she'd brought from home, a peanut butter sandwich. She'd been saving for her dinner break. Carlos followed her into the break room and closed the door behind him. "Rosa, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I wanted to say more, but—" "I know," Rosa said, trying to smile through her devastation. "You have your own family to think about. I understand." Carlos pulled a $20 bill from his wallet. "Take this." "It's not much, but—" Rosa shook her head. "I can't take your money, Carlos." "You need it for your kids, please," Carlos insisted, pressing the money into her hand. "You've helped me out plenty of times. Let me help you now." Rosa looked at the $20 and felt fresh tears threatening. She hugged Carlos quickly and then gathered her things. When she walked back through the dining room, Frank was standing behind the register counting money, as if nothing had happened. He didn't look up as she passed. Rosa untied her apron and set it on the counter. The apron she'd worn every day for 3 years. The one with Danny's Diner embroidered on the pocket. It felt like she was leaving part of herself behind. "The uniform, too," Frank said without looking up. Rosa stared at him. "You want me to change clothes here?" "Go in the bathroom and change. I want the uniform back. I paid for it." Rosa's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she went to the small bathroom and changed into her regular clothes, jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days. She folded the uniform carefully and placed it on Frank's desk. As she walked toward the front door for the last time, Rosa thought about David and his grateful smile when he'd finished his meal. She thought about how his eyes had lit up when he saw the grilled cheese sandwich. She thought about how he'd thanked her for being kind. Frank might have fired her, but he couldn't take away the fact that she'd done the right thing. A little boy had gone to bed with a full stomach because of her choice, and she would make that same choice again in a heartbeat. Rosa pushed through the front door of Danny's Diner and stepped into the afternoon sunlight. She had no job, no income, and no idea how she was going to pay the rent or buy her mother's medication. But as she walked away from the only job she'd had in 3 years, Rosa held her head high. She'd lost everything, but she'd kept her dignity and her compassion. Sometimes that was all a person really had. Rosa stepped out of Danny's Diner feeling like the world had collapsed around her. The afternoon sun felt too bright, the traffic too loud, everything too overwhelming. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. 3 years of work gone in an instant, all because she'd fed a hungry child. She started walking slowly down the street, her mind racing with worry. How would she tell her mother? How would they pay for the medication? The rent was due in 3 days, and now she had no way to earn the money they needed. Rosa felt panic rising in her chest and forced herself to take deep breaths. "Excuse me, miss?" Rosa turned around to see a man in a well-tailored gray suit walking toward her. He looked to be in his 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an expensive briefcase in his hand. Rosa immediately felt self-conscious about her old jeans and faded t-shirt. "Yes," she said cautiously. Living in this neighborhood had taught her to be careful around strangers, especially well-dressed ones who might be looking for trouble. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said with a gentle smile. "My name is Michael Chen. I was having lunch in the diner just now, and I couldn't help but notice what happened." Rosa's face flushed with embarrassment. Great, she thought. Now the whole neighborhood would know she'd been fired for giving away food. "I'm sorry if the arguing disturbed your meal," she said quietly. "Actually, that's not why I'm here," Michael said. "I wanted to talk to you about what you did for that little boy." Rosa looked at him suspiciously. "What about it?" "I saw the whole thing," Michael explained. "I watched you help him read the menu. I watched you create a special price just for him. And I saw you pay for his meal with your own money." Rosa didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to strangers paying attention to her work, and she definitely wasn't used to anyone caring about her acts of kindness. "Anyone would have done the same thing," Rosa said. Though she knew that wasn't true, Michael shook his head. "No, they wouldn't have. Trust me, I've been in the restaurant business for 20 years, and what you did was extraordinary." "You're in the restaurant business?" Rosa asked, curious despite herself. "I am. I own a company called Cornerstone Hospitality. We operate restaurants throughout the state." Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "We're always looking for people who understand what real customer service means." Rosa took the card and stared at it. The logo was elegant and professional, nothing like the faded signs at Danny's Diner. "I don't understand. Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a conversation," Michael said carefully. Would you be willing to have coffee with me tomorrow morning? I'd like to learn more about you and tell you about some opportunities we might have. Rosa felt a flutter of hope in her chest, but she quickly pushed it down. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Mr. Chen, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just a waitress. I don't have any special skills or education. You have something much more valuable than education, Michael said seriously. You have genuine compassion and the courage to act on it. Do you know how rare that is? Rosa thought about Frank Morrison's angry words, about how her kindness had cost her everything. Apparently it's too rare. It just got me fired. It got you fired from the wrong job, Michael corrected. Sometimes losing the wrong thing leads you to find the right thing. Rosa looked at the business card again. Michael Chen, Chief Executive Officer. She'd never met a CEO before, let alone had one offer to buy her coffee. I was actually in the diner to evaluate it, Michael continued. We've been considering purchasing some smaller restaurants in this area. But after watching how the owner treated you, I can tell you that won't be happening. You were going to buy Danny's diner? Rosa asked in surprise. We were considering it. But any business owner who would fire someone for showing kindness to a child is not someone we want to work with. Character matters more than profit margins. Rosa felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Frank had been so focused on his rules and his bottom line that he'd lost a potential buyer without even knowing it. The truth is, Michael said, I've been sitting in restaurants for 20 years watching how staff interact with customers. Most servers do their job adequately. Some do it well, but very few do what you did today. What did I do that was so special? Rosa asked, genuinely confused. You saw a need and you filled it without being asked. You paid attention to a customer that most people would have ignored. You sacrificed your own money to help someone else. And you did it all naturally without thinking about getting credit or recognition. Rosa shrugged. He was hungry. I had a few dollars. It wasn't complicated. That's exactly what makes it special, Michael said with a smile. For you it wasn't complicated. Kindness was just your natural response. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the traffic pass by. Rosa was still trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. From losing her job to meeting a CEO on the sidewalk, nothing about today made sense. Can I ask you something personal? Michael said. Rosa nodded. Why did you become a waitress? Rosa thought about the question. I needed work and Danny's was hiring. I was planning to go to nursing school, but my mother got sick and we needed the income right away. Nursing school, Michael repeated thoughtfully. So you've always wanted to help people? I guess so. When I was little, I used to pretend I was a nurse taking care of my dolls. I thought maybe someday I could work in a hospital helping people get better. What stopped you? Rosa gestured around at the rundown neighborhood. Life stopped me. Bills, rent, medical expenses. Dreams don't pay for medicine. Michael nodded with understanding. I know something about that. My parents worked 3 jobs between them just to keep food on the table when I was growing up. Rosa looked at his expensive suit and briefcase with new eyes. Really? Really? My father washed dishes in restaurants for 30 years. My mother cleaned office buildings at night. They taught me that honest work is always dignified no matter what kind of work it is. How did you go from that to owning restaurants? Lots of hard work, some good luck, and people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, Michael said. But mostly I learned that treating people right is the best business strategy there is. Rosa thought about Frank Morrison and his harsh words about profit margins and rules. Not everyone sees it that way. No, they don't. And that's why good people like you end up working for people like him. Michael checked his watch. I don't want to keep you any longer, but I hope you'll consider meeting with me tomorrow. Rosa looked at the business card one more time. A part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part was afraid to hope for something better. What time? She heard herself asking. How about 9 o'clock? There's a coffee shop called Brewster's on Maple Street. Do you know it? Rosa nodded. She'd walked past Brewster's many times, but never been inside. It looked expensive and intimidating. I'll see you there, Michael said, extending his hand for a handshake. And Rosa, don't let today make you doubt yourself. What you did was right, and the right people will recognize that. As Rosa walked home, she kept Michael's business card clutched tightly in her hand. For the first time in hours, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Rosa barely slept that night. She stared at Michael Chen's business card on her nightstand, wondering if their meeting had really happened or if she'd dreamed the whole thing. Every few minutes, she'd pick up the card and run her fingers over the raised letters, trying to convince herself it was real. Her mother had taken the news about losing her job better than expected. Elena had held Rosa's hands and told her that sometimes God closes one door to open another. Rosa wanted to believe that, but the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table made it hard to have faith. At 8:30 the next morning, Rosa stood outside Brewster's coffee shop, smoothing down her best blouse and checking her reflection in the window. The coffee shop was everything she'd imagined: polished wood floors, exposed brick walls, and the rich smell of freshly ground beans. Through the large windows, she could see people in business suits typing on laptops and having important-looking conversations. Rosa took a deep breath and pushed through the front door. A cheerful barista with purple hair and multiple piercings smiled at her from behind the counter. "Good morning. What can I get started for you?" Rosa looked at the menu board and felt overwhelmed. Everything was expensive and the names were confusing. Caramel macchiato, vanilla bean frappuccino, cold brew with oat milk. At Danny's diner, coffee was just coffee. "I'm actually meeting someone," Rosa said quietly. "Mr. Chen? Oh yes. He's right over there in the corner booth. And he already ordered for both of you." Rosa followed the barista's gesture and saw Michael Chen waving at her from a cozy booth by the window. He stood up as she approached, extending his hand with the same warm smile from yesterday. "Rosa, thank you for coming. Please sit down." The booth was more comfortable than any seat Rosa had ever sat in. The leather was soft and the table was polished to a perfect shine. In front of her was a large coffee mug with foam art on top, a delicate leaf pattern that seemed too pretty to drink. "I hope you don't mind that I ordered for you," Michael said. "I got you a vanilla latte. It's not too strong and most people enjoy it." Rosa took a sip and her eyes widened. The coffee was smooth and sweet, nothing like the bitter brew they served at the diner. "This is delicious. Thank you. Good. Now I want to learn more about you. Tell me about your family, your dreams, what matters most to you." For the next 20 minutes, Rosa found herself opening up to this stranger in ways she rarely did with anyone. She told him about her mother's diabetes, about working double shifts to pay for medication, about her abandoned dreams of nursing school. Michael listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and never making her feel judged. "You mentioned nursing school yesterday," Michael said. "Is that still something you'd want to pursue?" Rosa shrugged sadly. "I don't see how I could. Even if I could somehow afford the tuition, I can't stop working. My mother depends on me. What if I told you there might be a way to do both?" Rosa looked at him skeptically. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate you being kind to me, but I'm not sure why you're interested in helping a waitress from Danny's diner." Michael leaned back in his seat and smiled. "Let me tell you a story. When I was 12 years old, my family went through a really hard time. My father had been laid off from his job and we didn't have money for food. One day I went into a small restaurant and asked if I could wash dishes for a meal." Rosa listened intently as Michael continued. "The owner of that restaurant could have easily said no. Instead, she not only gave me work, but she also sent me home with extra food for my family. She didn't just feed me that day, she showed me what it meant to have dignity even when you're struggling." "What happened to her?" Rosa asked. "Years later, when I became successful, I tracked her down. She was elderly and her restaurant was failing. I bought the building and made sure she could keep running it as long as she wanted." Michael's eyes grew warm with the memory. "She taught me that how you treat people when they're vulnerable says everything about who you are." Rosa felt a connection to that story, understanding exactly what that restaurant owner had felt. "Yesterday, watching you with that little boy, I saw the same heart," Michael continued, "and I realized that you're exactly the kind of person I want working for my company. But Mr. Chen, I don't have any experience running a business or managing people." Michael waved away her concerns. "Experience can be taught. Character cannot, and you have the kind of character that makes people want to work harder and do better." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I'd like to offer you a position as a customer experience coordinator with Cornerstone Hospitality." Rosa stared at the folder without opening it. "What does that mean?" "It means you would travel to our different restaurants and help train our staff on customer service. You'd teach them what real hospitality looks like, the kind you showed yesterday." Rosa felt her heart racing. "Mr. Chen, I've never trained anyone. I wouldn't know how to teach people anything." "You wouldn't be teaching them techniques or scripts," Michael explained. You'd be teaching them to care. You'd help them understand that every customer is someone's family member, someone who deserves respect and kindness. Michael opened the folder and Rosa saw an official-looking document with her name at the top. Her eyes moved down the page until she saw the salary figure. She blinked hard and looked again. "This can't be right," she whispered. $45,000 a year to start, plus full health insurance for you and your mother, plus educational benefits. Rosa felt dizzy. Educational benefits? We'll pay for you to attend nursing school part-time. Your work schedule will be flexible enough to accommodate classes. Rosa put her hand over her mouth, feeling tears starting to form. "Mr. Chen, I don't understand." "Why are you doing this?" "Because yesterday you did something that most people wouldn't do. You sacrificed your own money to help a stranger. You lost your job because you chose kindness over rules. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Rosa looked around the coffee shop, at all the successful-looking people with their important jobs and nice clothes. "But I'm nobody special. I'm just a waitress who made a mistake." "You're not a waitress who made a mistake," Michael said firmly. "You're a compassionate person who did the right thing in a difficult situation. And now you're going to teach other people how to do the same thing." Rosa picked up the contract with shaking hands. Everything looked official and real. The company letterhead, the detailed job description, the benefits package that would change her entire life. "What about references?" Rosa asked. "Frank Morrison certainly won't give me a good one." Michael smiled. "I don't need a reference from Frank Morrison. I saw your work firsthand. Sometimes the best interview is just watching how someone treats others when they think nobody important is looking." Rosa thought about little David, about his grateful smile and the way his eyes had lit up when he saw the grilled cheese sandwich. She'd helped him without thinking about getting anything in return. Now somehow that single act of kindness was changing her entire future. "If you're willing to take a chance on me," Rosa said, her voice strong despite her tears, "then I'm ready to take a chance on myself." Michael extended his hand across the table. "Welcome to Cornerstone Hospitality, Rosa. I have a feeling you're going to change a lot of lives." As Rosa shook his hand, she realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. Yesterday she was a struggling waitress. Today she was stepping into a future she'd never dared to imagine. And somewhere in the city, a little boy named David was starting his day with a full stomach and the knowledge that there were still good people in the world.